Hello, I'm Becky Goldsmith with Piece of Cake, and I want to show you now how to use the hexagon papers. I use the ones made by Paper Pieces, and inside each package there are a number of different paper hexagons. I'm using the 1-inch hexagons, and what that means is that they are 1 inch on a side. The way Linda and I both like to begin is by cutting strips of fabric that are 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch bigger than the hexagon on at least 2 sides. That makes it easier, we think, to handle these and cut them to size. Now, you can do this a variety of ways. I'm just making one right now, so I'm going to pick this up and cut this chunk off. Depending on the size of the hexagon, you might want to take a pin, and the 3/4 inch pins made by Clover are a good choice for this. You might want to pin the fabric to the hexagon just to keep it in place as you trim away this excess fabric. Now, I have looked and seen that some people don't like to, or don't take the time to trim these edges down to a tidy seam allowance, but I think you end up with a prettier finished product if your seam allowances are uniform. So I'm cutting this down to something a little bit bigger than 1/4 of an inch. I'm trying to get this extra fabric out of the way. Now what I'm going to do is bend the fabric over the hexagon, and I make sure it's nice and tight over that edge. I'm going to zoom the camera in just a little bit more. Now I'm using a bigger needle. Linda likes to use her regular applique needle, I believe, because it leaves a smaller hole in the paper. I like to use a stouter needle because I just like to use a stouter needle, and what that means is you can use whatever needle you want to use. So I've loaded my needle with regular piecing thread. I'm using the Masterpiece thread, Masterpiece made by Superior, and I'm going to just tack the fabric over the edge of the paper. Now when you get to the corner, turn it over, make a nice little fold there, and what I want to do is bring my needle up before the fold, and then I want to go down and catch that fabric, catch the fold and the paper so that it's held nicely in place. Here I might go down, come back up, just like that. And you work your way around the paper just like this. I'm going to stop the camera and come back to you once I am almost all the way to the end of this. I'm back. I've worked around most of the edges, and I'm back. I'm now to the last edge of the hexagon. When you fold this side over, you're going to need to fold over both corners at once. Well, sort of at once. Get the final one mostly turned under, but you'll get to refine that crease as you get to it. So here I want to make sure that that's nice and neat. Now here I'm going to go into the hexagon slightly beyond that fold. See how it holds the fold in place? But rather than putting a knot there, I do a back stitch. So I'm going to come up there and back down over here. That's going to hold the thread in place. It's not going to come undone. Once you're done with that, cut away the thread. You can leave just a little bit of a tail. And that's how you cover a paper hexagon. Really, no matter what the shape or size of the hexagon, this is how you do it. I would take this pin out, use it on my next hexagon. You can make as many of these as you need. You can sit down and make hexagons for minutes or hours or days. And that's how you do it. This hexagon, you might notice, has holes in it. It's one that I have used before and removed once I didn't need the paper inside the flower again. This can be reused. So don't throw away the hexes just because they've got little holes in them. Remember that you can use them, so take care of them. Here are two hexagons that I've already covered with fabric, and I'm going to sew these together. Ultimately, I want to make a flower, say similar to either of these. To construct a flower like this, if you look, you'll notice that there's 6 outer hexagons or petals in one flower center. So to construct this, you would begin by sewing together these 2 hexes in a pair, and these 2 hexes in a pair, and these 2 hexes in a pair. So that's where I'm going to start with this. I'm going to sew together these 2 hexes to make a pair. You pick them up in your hand and turn them so that they are right sides together. Now you'll notice it doesn't really matter which direction these hexes go in the flower. If I was making a flower that had a directional pattern that was important, I would be very careful to sew them together so that the right sides meet each other. But here, it doesn't really matter. So I would take these 2 hexes, place them right sides together, and I'm going to sew these 2 sides together. Now let me zoom in. I may have zoomed in too far, we're a little fuzzy. Okay, there we go. What I like to do, I've loaded my needle with matching thread. I'm using the same thread I would applique with, which is the Superior's Masterpiece off the bobbin. I'm using my regular applique needle, which for me is the Clover Black Gold needle. Now I'm going to go between the paper and the seam allowance, letting my needle skim over the paper, and I'm going to bring the needle out at the point at that corner right there. And that will help bury the tail of thread and the knot. Now I'm just going to do a little whip stitch to whip these 2 hexes together. Begin right at the corner. Don't move in from the corner. Just like that. And do your best not to catch the paper. You want to just catch the fabric. My stitches are very close to each other. There's not much distance between them. But there again, it's possibly a matter of taste how close you put these stitches together. When I open it up, I don't like to see gaps, much space between these stitches. I want it held nice and tight. So I would whip these together just like this. Whoops. Now again, while I'm finishing this sewing, I will stop the camera and start it up again at the end so I can show you the knot. Now I've sewn almost to the end. I want to finish this by sewing these 2 points together, and I'm going to do a back stitch here. What I mean by that is I'm going in, taking my needle in and pushing it out in the same place that I did on the previous stitch. And I often make a knot here by running the needle through that loop of thread and pulling it tight. Then I bury the tail, so I'm going to take my needle and run it underneath the fabric, but above that paper. You can see where the needles come out. And that's where I would clip my thread, just like that. So now I've got this pair sewn together. The paper is still in here. I would not remove the paper at this time. Now the next thing I want to do, well, if I was making a flower, the next thing I would want to do is make 2 more pairs of hexagons. And once those other pairs of hexagons were together, I'd want to set in the flower center, just like this. Now, how you sew the flower center in is very similar to the way you sewed the 2 hexes together. I would pick this up and pay attention that if it mattered, I have this hex on the right side, the flower center. I'm going to place that right sides together here and concentrate first on sewing these 2 parts, these 2 sides of the 2 hexagons together. And I'm going to sew them together just exactly the way I sewed the last 2 hexagons together, burying the tail of thread and the knot and starting to sew them together, at the corner, and then moving across this line just as I'm doing here. I'm sorry, I moved that off camera. And just in case earlier in the film I have moved that off camera, I'll take a few more stitches here so that you can see how that looks. Just like that. Alright, now I'm going to stop the camera and begin again when I reach this point, because that's where the next exciting thing happens. Alright, I'm almost to that point. Let me make sure I'm on the camera. Yes. Now, as you sew up to this corner, make sure that you haven't let your stitches get too large. You're going to want to make 1 stitch through these 2 corners, and then I like to do another stitch in exactly the same place. It's either it's like a back stitch or a locking stitch. Now if you want to, you can throw in a knot. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but I always do that back stitch. Now I'm not going to cut my thread here. There's no good reason to. The next thing I want to sew together is this joint right here, these 2 pieces. I'm going to place them right sides together. Now what happens is this folds. Now I suppose you could, but I never do, crease this. I just let it fold gently. Now be careful that you don't let it move off or skew sideways. I focus on the sides that I want to sew together, and I do my best to keep the meeting between them as perfect as I can. Now you're going to sew beginning right here at this point, and continue on just the way you would on any other any other sides of hexagons that you're sewing together. That was a very wordy way to say that, but I think you see what I mean. But it's always the same thing when you're sewing these paper hexagons together. You're sewing together 2 sides that are the same length with a tight, close whip stitch. Use matching thread as much as you can, because then your stitches will show less on the front. Now I got to tell you, this goes really, really fast. It's a fun project to carry with you. You'll be surprised if you always have some hexagons with you, just how much you can get done in those spare, odd moments of your life. Now, You don't need to see me sew any more of this because you've already seen me sew to the end and it doesn't change. It's always the same. Now when you open it up, this is what it would look like. And then if I wanted to sew on another pair with this sewn together, I would place the next pair here, put them right sides together and sew there and then there. At each juncture, you attach and sew together the next set of lines. Now I've had a lot of fun using directional fabrics with when I'm making my own hexagon flowers, and I've been using some as flower centers. I mean, these are just fun, but you could also combine these with more and more hexagons, building these farther out. Really, the possibilities are limitless. You might be wondering when you take the papers out. I don't want to forget to cover that. When I use these as flower centers, or when I'm making these to applique down, what I do first is press them from the front and the back with a hot iron, no steam. And then I take the basting out, and generally I start in the center. Let me zoom in here just a bit. I think that will work. I use a toothpick or a skewer. It works better for me because it's something with a point that doesn't snag on the fabric. So first I loosen that back stitch. I take the basting stitches out, just like that. Usually I can get back to where I can grab the tail of the beginning end of my basting stitch, and I take that out. Now, once I've done that, the paper will just pop out. But if I was going to take the papers out of this whole flower, I would take the basting out of all of the shapes and then pop the papers out of all the hexes, just like that. So once the papers are out, for the way I use them, they'd be ready to applique down. If you were going to make, say, a larger grandmother's flower garden quilt where you had lots and lots of hexes out, you should play it by ear. At some point you're going to have so many hexes together that it's hard to handle in your hand. And at that point you would take out the hexes that are in your way. I would probably press the things flat before I took hexes out. I hope that was clear. I hope you enjoy this. These are fast and fun and so versatile. Enjoy them. Happy stitching.